"Sign right there," the woman said, sliding a pen across the marble counter without looking up. "And try not to get anything on the display models. Last time someone from the crew touched the Steinway, we had to have it retuned." The someone from the crew was Nora Voss, 41 years old. She was wearing paint-stained Carhartt pants and steel-toed boots because she'd come straight from a job site in Midtown. And the pen the woman slid across the counter had a little crystal swan on the end of it, the kind of pen that exists to remind people which side of the counter they belong on. Nora signed. She didn't say anything. She had learned a long time ago that silence saved energy, and she was going to need every bit of it tonight. The occasion was the grand reopening of Hargrove & Sons, the oldest and most expensive piano showroom in New York City. 4 floors of instruments that started at $40,000 and climbed from there. The Hargrove family had been selling pianos to concert halls and old money for 112 years, and tonight they were celebrating the renovation of their Fifth Avenue flagship with a reception that required a catering crew, a string trio, and 200 guests in evening wear. Nora was there to tune the pianos. She ran Voss piano service out of a van she kept cleaner than her apartment. 12 years in business. Clients from Carnegie Hall to the Met, though nobody at Hargrove & Sons knew that because nobody at Hargrove & Sons had hired her. The regular tuner had called out sick that afternoon, and the agency had sent Nora as a replacement, which meant she arrived with a tool bag instead of a business card, and the woman at the front counter, whose nameplate read Candace, Senior Associate, had looked at Nora's boots and made a decision that would follow her for the rest of her career. "Service entrance is around the side," Candace said. "Please use it for the duration of the event." Nora used it. She spent the first hour moving quietly through the showroom floor, working her way from instrument to instrument with a tuning hammer and an ear that had been calibrated by 20 years of practice. She was on the 3rd floor when she heard it. A Bösendorfer Imperial. 97 keys, one of only a few hundred in existence. It sat in a glass-walled salon at the back of the floor like something that belonged in a museum, which, in a way it did, because the Hargroves kept it as a showpiece and never let anyone play it. A small brass sign on the bench read, "For display only. Please do not touch." Someone was touching it. He was a boy, maybe 9 years old. Dark blazer, clip-on tie, clearly someone's son dragged to a party he hadn't asked to attend. He wasn't playing it, exactly. He was pressing a single key with one finger very softly, the way children test ice on a pond, listening to the note decay. Then he pressed another, and another, and Nora stopped walking, because the notes he was choosing were not random. He was playing the opening 4 bars of a Chopin nocturne, and he was playing them correctly, and he was playing them by ear, in the dark, on an instrument he had never touched before. She was still standing there when the voice cut across the room. "Excuse me, that instrument is not to be played." Candace had arrived with 2 members of the floor staff behind her. She was speaking to the boy, but she was looking at Nora, the way people look at the nearest person they can hold responsible. "Whose child is this?" Candace said. A woman appeared from the hallway, slightly breathless, a catering apron still half-tied. Her name was Ruth Okafor, and she had been working Hargrove events for 3 years, long enough to know which rooms her son was not supposed to wander into. "I'm so sorry," Ruth said. "Tobias, come here, please." The boy, Tobias, stepped back from the piano. He didn't look frightened. He looked the way children look when adults interrupt something they find genuinely interesting. "He wasn't hurting anything," Nora said. Candace turned. "I'm sorry?" The boy. "He wasn't hurting anything. He was being careful." Candace looked at Nora the way she had looked at her boots an hour ago. "The instrument is not to be played. That applies to guests, to staff, and to—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Contractors. It's a piano," Nora said. "It's built to be played." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when someone says something true in a room where truth is inconvenient. "I think," said a voice from the doorway, "that we should let the boy finish." The man who stepped in was maybe 65. Silver hair, a dark suit, no tie, the kind of ease that doesn't come from money alone. His name was Frederick Hargrove III, and he was the reason there was a showroom to reopen. He had a glass of something amber in one hand, and the expression of a man who had been watching the exchange from the hall for longer than anyone had noticed. He nodded at Tobias. "Go ahead, son," Candace said. "Mr. Hargrove?" Candace. That was all. Just her name. The way you stop a clock. Tobias sat back down. He found the opening note again, and this time he played the whole phrase, all the way through, both hands, from memory. 16 bars of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, played softly enough that the crystal glasses on the drinks table didn't ring. When he finished, he sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the keys. Frederick Hargrove set down his glass. He said quietly, "Who taught you that?" Tobias looked at his mother. Ruth was holding the door frame, and her face had gone somewhere complicated. "My mom," Tobias said. "She used to play. Before. The word landed in the room like something breakable. Hargrove looked at Ruth, and then at Nora, and then at the piano, and then he said, "Can you play?" He was asking Nora. She said no, which was true, technically. She didn't play. She tuned. There was a difference she had spent 20 years honoring, and she wasn't going to abandon it now because a rich man asked her a question at a party. But she said something else. She said, "His mother can." To understand what happened next, you have to go back before the showroom, before the service entrance, before the crystal swan pen. You have to go back to a church basement in the Bronx on a Tuesday afternoon in 1987, where a 7-year-old named Nora Voss first heard Ruth Okafor play the piano. They had grown up 4 blocks apart in Fordham. Ruth's family was Nigerian. Her father was a postal worker. Her mother taught 3rd grade. Nora's family was Polish-American, 3 generations in the same walk-up, her grandmother still cooking beet soup on Sundays. The neighborhood had introduced them the way neighborhoods do, gradually, inevitably, through the shared gravity of being the same age in a small place. The church basement had an upright piano that was roughly 1 major war old and had not been tuned since Eisenhower. Ruth sat down in front of it on a Tuesday, and everyone else in the room stopped what they were doing. She was 7 years old, and she played like she was recalling something she had always known. The notes were imperfect. The piano saw to that, but the music was not. Nora had felt something shift in her chest that afternoon, the particular dislocation of hearing beauty come from somewhere unexpected. She had never forgotten it. Ruth went to LaGuardia High School on a music scholarship. She could have gone further. Her piano teacher at LaGuardia told her mother that, carefully, after Ruth had played the 3rd movement of a Beethoven sonata at the winter recital and made 2 other teachers cry, but further cost money that the Okafor family was already redirected toward rent and her younger brother's school uniforms and her father's medication for a back that had been broken carrying mail for 22 years. Ruth graduated. She got a job. She got married, had Tobias, got divorced. She catered events because the hours matched Tobias's school schedule and the tips were reliable, and nobody asked what else she had once been capable of. She had not played in 11 years. She'd told Nora once that it wasn't grief exactly. It was more like choosing not to look at a window because the view would remind you how small the room was. Nora had become a piano tuner for reasons that were, in some ways, the inverse of Ruth's. She couldn't play. She'd tried at 12, at 15, again at 20, but she could hear everything. Every shade of a note's beginning and middle and end. Every fraction of a semitone that separated in tune from almost. Her grandmother had called it a gift. Her high school music teacher had said the same. The irony was not lost on Nora that the person who could hear everything had chosen to spend her life in service of the people who could play it. She had built a good life from it, a quiet life. 12 years of good work for people who never learned her last name. Tonight, in a room with a $100,000 piano and a woman in a catering apron, something was about to change. Frederick Hargrove asked again. Not Nora this time. He had crossed the room and was standing near Ruth, and his voice had lost the formal edge it carried in front of Candace. Would you play? He said. Ruth shook her head. I haven't played in a long time. How long? 11 years. He considered that. The Bösendorfer doesn't mind, he said. It hasn't been played in 3. Ruth looked at her son. Tobias was watching her with the expression of a child who knows something important is happening and has the good sense not to speak. I don't remember all of it, Ruth said. Play what you remember. She sat down. She adjusted the bench the way pianists do, something Nora recognized as the muscle memory of a real player, the small ritual of inhabiting an instrument before you touch it. She put her hands on the keys. She played. It was the same Chopin nocturne Tobias had started. She picked it up from the beginning, and for the first 4 bars Nora thought she was right. She was hesitant, slightly mechanical, the hands remembering the route before the feeling caught up. And then something unlocked. Bar 5. The phrase that breathes. Ruth's shoulders dropped a centimeter, and the piano answered, and the sound that came out of the Bösendorfer filled the glass-walled room and went somewhere further than the walls. No one moved. Candace was still standing in the doorway. 3 floor staff were behind her. Somewhere in the hall, guests from the reception had begun to drift toward the salon, drawn by the sound the way people are drawn to open fires. A woman in a red dress stopped walking mid-conversation and put her hand on her companion's arm. Ruth played for 4 minutes. She played the whole nocturne, and near the end she made an error. A small one, a skipped ornament in the right hand, and she played through it without stopping, which is what trained musicians do, and the error was so small that only Nora, in the entire room, heard it. When she finished, the last note hung in the air the way the Bösendorfer let notes hang, which was longer and more present than any other piano Nora had ever tuned. Then Frederick Hargrove began to clap. Not polite applause, the real kind, the kind that starts from the chest. The guests in the hall followed, 20 of them, then 30. Someone whistled. The woman in the red dress pressed both hands to her mouth. Ruth sat with her hands in her lap, not moving. Her son was beside her now. Nobody had seen him move, and he had pressed his small shoulder against her arm, and she was looking at the keys like she was relearning something she had tried to forget. Candace said nothing. Her expression was the particular one that arrives when a category you relied on has failed you. Nora stood at the edge of the room and felt the thing she had felt in that church basement in 1987. The dislocation of unexpected beauty. She was crying, and she didn't particularly mind. What happened after that happened quickly, the way things do when rooms change their minds. Frederick Hargrove asked Ruth her name. She told him. He asked how long she had played. She said since she was 5. He asked who had taught her. She said her mother first. Then a man named Wilson at LaGuardia, who had threatened to quit the faculty if the school board cut the music budget, and who had been making that threat every year since 1979 without following through, but who had meant it every time. Hargrove laughed. I know Wilson, he said. He threatened to quit when I was on the board in 2004. I called his bluff. He stayed. He always stays, Ruth said. A woman named Dr. Patricia Sung, who was the artistic director of the Hargrove Foundation and had been standing at the back of the room since bar 6, stepped forward and introduced herself. The Hargrove Foundation ran a concert series. It also funded a re-entry program for adult musicians, returning to performance after interruption, which was what Dr. Sung called it. Interruption. And the word was careful and accurate and did not require Ruth to explain what the interruption had been. Ruth listened. She asked 3 questions, sensible ones about schedule and compensation, and whether the program allowed for part-time participation while she maintained other employment, because Tobias had a school year and a pediatric appointment in March, and she was not going to upend his life on the basis of a single Chopin nocturne at a party. Dr. Sung said yes to all 3. Nora had been listening from the edge of the group. She was holding her tuning bag and thinking about the service entrance and the crystal swan pen and the word contractors when Hargrove turned to her directly. You told us about her, he said. She told herself, Nora said. I just said the words. He smiled. Who are you exactly? Nora Voss. I tune pianos. Who do you tune for? She told him. Carnegie Hall. The Met. Three of the 7 Steinway artists currently based in New York. She said it the way she always said it, flatly, without emphasis, because the work spoke well enough for itself, and she had never been interested in performing her own resume. The expression that crossed Hargrove's face was one Nora had seen before. It was the expression of a person recalculating. You've been tuning our instruments for 5 years, he said slowly. The regular tuner gets credit. You've been the backup. 3rd time this year, Nora said. And you never said anything. I was hired to tune, not to introduce myself. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that changes. What Candace did next surprised some people and surprised nobody at all. She waited until Hargrove had left the salon with Dr. Sung, and then she followed Nora into the hallway near the service stairs and said, in a voice pitched below the reception noise, I don't know what you think you accomplished tonight. Nora stopped. She turned around. I think Ruth got a real opportunity, she said, and Tobias got to finish the song. You embarrassed a senior member of this company in front of the owner. I said a boy wasn't hurting anything. That's not embarrassing anyone. Candace's chin lifted a degree. People like you come in through the service entrance for a reason. It keeps things organized. It keeps everyone in their proper place. Nora looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the church basement in 1987. She thought about 20 years of service entrances and contractor badges and crystal swan pens. She thought about Ruth's shoulders dropping on bar 5. The thing about a piano, Nora said, is that it doesn't care who tunes it. It only cares whether it's in tune. And I've been doing this long enough to know the difference. She picked up her bag and went back to work. She had 2 more instruments to finish on the 4th floor, and she was going to finish them correctly, because that was the job, and the job was what she had always been good at, and being good at something doesn't require an audience. But she had one. Frederick Hargrove appeared on the 4th floor 40 minutes later, while she was at work on a Hamburg Steinway near the east window. He stood and watched without speaking. Nora worked. The city ran its lights across the windows. I'd like to offer you a formal contract, he said when she put down the tuning hammer. Hargrove & Sons, preferred vendor for all instruments, all events. Your name on the paperwork, your rate, not the agency's. Nora considered this. What about the service entrance? You can use whichever door you like, he said. She considered this for a longer moment. 12 years was a long time to be invisible, and visibility was a different kind of work, and she wasn't entirely sure she was ready for it. But she thought about Tobias pressing a single key in the dark, listening. She thought about Ruth sitting down on that bench and adjusting it the way real players do. She thought about what it means to have a gift and spend 20 years watching other people be thanked for something adjacent to it. All right, she said. Hargrove nodded. Good. He started for the stairs, then stopped. Candace will be reassigned, he said, not as an apology. Just information. I want you to know that. That's your decision, Nora said. Not mine. Yes, he paused. But you could have made it yours tonight and you didn't. I noticed that. He left. Nora finished the Steinway. That was 8 months ago. Ruth Okafor performed her first public recital through the Hargrove Foundation's re-entry program on a Thursday evening in February at a 200-seat hall in the West Village. Tobias sat in the front row in the same blazer and clip-on tie, and this time the tie was his own idea. She played Chopin. She played Fauré. She played one of her own compositions which she had not told anyone about, including Nora, and which had been sitting in a notebook in a drawer for 11 years. The audience did not know it was a premiere. They responded as though they did. The last piece was the Nocturne, the same one, all the way through, no missed ornament, everything in place. When she finished, Tobias stood up before anyone else moved, the way kids do when they don't know yet that you're supposed to wait. And his single pair of hands made more sound than they had any right to. Nora sat in the third row and wept in the uncomplicated way that comes from watching someone return to themselves. Nora Voss is still a piano tuner. That is not a lesser thing to be, and she would tell you so. She added 3 new clients in the months after Hargrove signed her to a formal contract, and she refers to herself on her website now, which she finally built, reluctantly, at Ruth's insistence, as New York's most booked independent piano technician. Because that's what the numbers say, and the numbers don't lie. She still drives the same van. She keeps it cleaner than her apartment. Candace took a position at a smaller showroom in Westchester. By all accounts, she is good at it. People tend to be good at the jobs that fit them. And Tobias Okafor, age 9, is currently ranked 3rd in his division in the New York State Youth Piano Competition, which his grandfather, Ruth's father, still working his route in Fordham. Back still bad, follows on the Regional Chess Club app because someone set it up wrong on his phone, and he refused to let anyone fix it because watching Tobias win had become his Tuesday ritual. His hands are cracked from 22 years of carrying mail. His back aches in ways he doesn't mention. He attends every recital in a suit he's had since 1998, and he sits in the front row next to a boy in a blazer, and when the music starts he closes his eyes and moves his fingers on his knee, the way people do when they once knew something by heart and still do, somewhere underneath the forgetting. So here is what I want to leave you with. There is always a service entrance. In every building, every room, every industry, someone has decided where certain people belong and where they don't, and they have made it a door instead of a rule because doors are easier to enforce. Nora walked through hers for 12 years. Ruth spent 11 years not walking through hers at all. What changed wasn't talent. Talent was always there, in the church basement, in the van, in the boy pressing a key in the dark. What changed was a moment when someone said the true thing out loud instead of staying quiet, save energy. I tell these stories because there is right now someone in your life walking through the wrong door. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you haven't thought to ask. So tell me, whose gift have you been watching go unrecognized? Whose name should this story have been about instead? Leave it below. I read everyone. And if this moved you, share it with someone who's been using the service entrance long enough.